All right, here we are, the first Wednesday in June. We are now into the 6th month of the year. How about that?
Man, halfway into the year? What?
I know. We are on the first Wednesday of June, which, as we know, is the 6th month. So we are almost at the halfway point of 2023.
I'm happy that it's actually been a really good year, very, very productive, and just hoping that the year gets better for a lot of people. There are a lot of challenges going on with mental health in today's time. They keep talking about this recession, which can create panic and fear,
Yeah.
anxiety, and people need help and treatment with that. So we're just hoping to provide some outlets and some resources for everyone. So
hmm
hello and good day to everybody.
So I got some notes. We're going to cover a couple different topics, a couple of the interesting, including an update on those Vegas consumption lounge hotels, which are not what we thought they were. We got that actually from Gray out there in Vegas. But two things real quick. In a little bit, I'm going to get into what June is because, as we know, every month is a little something different. So you see, I'm wearing two different things. First of all, I got my Florida State hoodie on today because the women's team is playing Oklahoma in the College World Series softball championship starting tonight, which Oklahoma's won 50 straight games. NCAA records. You hear that?
Wow,
It's going to be an
man,
interesting matchup.
it is. But you know what? Florida State's had a great history in the softball, so I
Mm-hmm.
definitely understand the support for them. Schools overall is a school that has created champions on all levels, from football to basketball, ladies
Soccer, women's soccer.
softball,
Yeah.
soccer. Yeah, now it's a tremendous school, Florida State.
This is the rematch of the 2021 series that Florida State won 2 games to 3 in that best of three series. So we'll see how this goes. Second thing is, I have my Yankees hat on today. Question is, do you know why?
That one I would like to know.
All right, so this month, which we're going to get into a little bit later, is known as part of one of the things that's covered is ALS Awareness Month, which, of course, ALS, which we'll dive into, is tied in mostly known through Lou Gehrig, correct?
That is correct.
Now, this past Sunday was National Cancer Survivors Day, number one. Number two, wearing it because we're going to talk about ALS. Here's the interesting fact. Number one, we know that he gave that speech on July 4th, correct? When he retired,
Yep.
which almost everybody's heard the famous quote, of course, today I consider myself the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Two things, though. Number one, he was retired on July 4th. He wore number 4. Did you know that?
Hmm.
Number
Interesting.
two, the Yankees were the first organization in pro sports to retire a number, and his was the first number ever retired.
Wow. Okay.
So, throwing that little tidbit out before we get into the ALS, and we're going to talk about ALS and cannabis in a little bit. But first of all, we're going to go to Illinois. Legislation passed a bill that would allow cannabis business to take state tax deductions. This is legal at the federal level, illegal at the federal level due to the IRS Code Section 28E. The measure is part of a larger bill that is making its way to the governor for signing right now.
Wow.
So,
That's tremendous for a tax credit because they're allowing those companies to have life.
yes,
Um, but by creating a tax deduction, it allows them to keep more monies in their pockets because there is bona fide business expenses in doing and transacting business. So
absolutely.
by giving them a credit that they can use now to sustain business development and growth, that is tremendous. Shout out to Illinois on that.
Absolutely. So now we're going to go into the update real quick on those Vegas consumption lounges. So, how about this? You can only smoke on the fourth floor of this consumption lounge hotel. And that's able to do with a legal keyhole that they're doing on the private residence loophole there. The reason the private property casinos don't allow consumption is they are scared of losing their liquor license or their gaming license due to the fact that the consumption is not federally legal. So this consumption lounge hotel does not have the casino in it, and they're only allotting it on the fourth floor only.
Why the fourth floor? That is
I don't know,
that's interesting.
but room 20 is probably going to be in high demand.
420.
Yep.
Yeah, that's, you know what, that I now it's lining up now. Wow,
Right. So
that's a
we found that out. And this is a previous hotel just under new ownership, new management, so to speak. And they're only allowing it on the fourth floor, like we said. But they have been known for kicking individuals out in the past who have smoked in their room. So let's see what actually ends up happening for sure.
okay.
So now let's get into a little bit about June. So, what is June, of course? Now, June comes from Juno. I'm sure you've heard that. Ancient
Yeah.
Roman goddess of marriage and childbirth. And the month of June is still popular for weddings today. It's a natural expression of marriage. Juno was the goddess of childbirth. Another interpretation of the origins of June says that it comes from the Latin junivis, for young people who would celebrate at this time. And as we said, June 4th was National Cancer Survivors Day. Now, here's a couple other things in the month of June. One of them that I'm sure that we know because it's in the media and a lot of places will go. It is known as the most attention given to the LGBTQ and Pride Month, right? It's
Okay.
also PTSD Awareness Month, Gun Violence Awareness Month, Alzheimer and Brain Awareness Month, and Immigrant Heritage Month. And of course, ALS is in there as well. So what we wanted to go through and talk a little bit about, for example, let's go with Alzheimer's. We're going to hit a little bit on almost each of these subsets. Alzheimer's and cannabis. What do you think about that? Do you think that could be something that could help?
Absolutely. In Alzheimer's, the person is losing cognitive ability,
Mm-hmm.
and cannabis actually enhances cognitive activity. So it can definitely be very, very helpful and beneficial in slowing down the degenerative process
Right.
of that. So, yeah, I definitely would love to see more research in that area. I introduced my grandmother to cannabis, and she has the early stages of Alzheimer's.
So what they're kind of saying is that it's an agitation, the common change in behavior, which we know people who have it. While everyone agrees that agitation should be first treated, as they're saying, through a non-drug approach, medications may be needed for the severity of that agitation. And not everybody responds properly to it, right? So there are existing medications that can treat the type of behavior, but many of them, and I'm sure you've heard, have harmful side effects. So right there, there's an issue. In fact, the medications tend to be most effective can sometimes lead to stroke and even death.
Mm.
Now, as we talked about before, cannabinoids, on the other hand, interact with the body differently, which means they can be safer, more effective, and overall for someone experiencing the agitation. Some of the effects are even thought to help reproduce brain cell death. How about that?
Wow.
So
Wow.
they could be smoking this and they could actually be bringing back those brain cells that now have been as what we classify as a dead cell, bringing them back to life. That you would think that would be a huge advantage, wouldn't you?
That is huge. I mean, refiring those neurons.
All right.
Uh, I mean, and just like one of the notions that Doc used to say is that cannabinoid um, works with the endocrine system,
Mm-hmm.
um, which is totally deals with the skeletal functional portions of the body. So I think it's great, just to hear that.
Now, I think it's fantastic, but unfortunately, as it keeps on saying, there have only been limited numbers of studies, and we've heard this time and time again, of course, and that's a lot because, as we know, Scheduled One.
Right.
So, very limited in that. Further study is important because the cannabinoids may not have the same effect on the brain with the Alzheimer's disease as they do on a healthy brain. For example, while cannabinoids have the calming effect when used in general population, they may have the opposite effect in the people with the Alzheimer's disease. So there's still a lot of questions there because the cannabinoids in cannabis interact with the network of cell receptors, like we're saying, throughout the human body called the endocannabinoid system. This system exists in our bodies to interact with the naturally occurring cannabinoids, which play a role in regulating a variety of different bodily functions. So was saying that first part, if that is already in our natural systems that we talked about, wouldn't a natural product tend to help that to begin with?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what you would think, because the cannabinoid receptors are found in most tissues and organs, but are particularly numerous in the brain. So that right there tells you that, hey, this is an important step that we should take to help these people with a natural plant, with a natural drug overall.
Should be. And I think because it's Schedule One, there's going to always be pushback because if the Fed don't support it as it
Right.
should be, it won't get the support, and then it won't move. It won't be allowed to help people in the way it should.
Exactly. Because when cannabis is consumed and its cannabinoids act on these receptors, they alter and release neurochemicals in the brain, which changes how the brain cells communicate with each other. This, in turn, affects various processes with our bodies, including the appetite, pain, mood, memory, and learning. So, right there, with how we talk about how Alzheimer's is and the memory, the learning, those would be huge, wouldn't you think?
Yes, it would be.
Now objectives. The study was to discuss the research and the trend of dementia treatment using cannabis for the purpose of providing the basis of cannabis use for the medical purpose in the future. The methods which they used, the study searched publications which were registered to databases or published by August of 2019. So this is a few years back, and targeted the full text of abstracts of these publications. They selected 9 studies to meet all of these criteria. Now, how about this? Here's the result. The result implied that the CBD components of cannabis might be useful and prevent AD because the CBD components could suppress the main causal factors of AD. Moreover, it was suggested that the CBD and THC together could be more useful than the CBD or THC alone. So those two together right there are going to help. And in conclusion, they're hoping that they will have found a solid foundation to use cannabis for medical use by continuously evaluating the possibility. Now, of course, we said they're the key, continuously. So that means we got to keep studying, keep doing research, keep doing studies for clinical purposes as dementia treatment substance, and cannabis can be used as a positive tool.
Now that's definitely tremendous. It can be used as a positive tool.
Right.
And it's just a reiteration of what I was saying before. As soon as it comes off that Schedule One list, the benefits will be just totally wide open. I still think that this is an intervention from the stigmas and myths that's been put out there on cannabis itself, and I really just think that taking it off Schedule One and then two, the research speaking for itself with unadulterated information will validate anything moving forward.
Absolutely. And I really think that once we get it off Schedule One, the floodgates, so to speak, are going to open. Now, of course, they are saying that if you live with Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia and have concerns or questions about it and about cannabis, the Alzheimer's Society recommends that you consult your family doctor or healthcare provider. Yeah, but as we said before, yes, still should happen. But keep in mind, not all doctors are cannabis friendly.
That's true. Totally true.
So you've got to kind of keep that in mind. I'm, as we spoke before, kind of doing that with my father. I don't think his doctors are very cannabis friendly, even though I've been trying to get him on different forms of it, whether it be oral or anything else, or even, an abstract that we can put in a drink for him. So got to keep that out there. We don't have all the doctors on that same thing. And as we said before, that could be multiple reasons. Big pharma,
That is the
money.
myth. That's the
Right.
myth that's out there. When you think about your education and you stand down 100% on what you were taught, but what if the person that taught you only taught you at 90% accuracy instead of 100%?
Right.
So now you got a 10% margin of error in one person. That
Mm-hmm.
one person applies that margin of error to every person they encounter. Now they're adding a 10% margin of error. So just imagine you get the wrong information at a 90% clip.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
now you're putting it back out there 90% wrong to everybody you're coming in contact with.
Mhm.
So when you if you look at it from perspectives under that circumstance that I'm speaking on, every individual should always seek further information or education. That's one of the reasons why I say I'm a student of life. That's one, first and foremost, I'm a student of life. I'm not the end all tell all. I'm
No.
still learning so that way I can still give myself an opportunity to be a better person in a better place. And then also help people be a better person, be in a better place. I don't know everything. I'll be the first one to say I don't know everything, and I think that as I seek more information and be involved in more news and what's going on, yeah, true indeed, we have our opinions, but at the same time, let's keep it to the facts. We do that, that'll liberate us and that'll push us forward in the industry with the accuracy that needs to be put out there. There's just too many myths out there, and the mindsets that are out there, they're closed minded and they're still listening to the old myths, or they're being influenced by the dollar. And that dollar's coming from Big Pharma or from any of the dozen government agencies that are still putting out there cannabis is still a Schedule 1, it's still not legal,
Mhm.
it's still not supported. So you still have a huge wall in front of us that's a very, very long wall that's going to take quite a while to get around or go over.
No, absolutely. But then on the other side of that too, we've got to get back is what we've discussed before is that we need to learn how to discuss things. And that needs to go from our political leaders down to our individuals on the streets. Because I think as
Yeah,
a whole, we don't understand that anymore. I mean, if I was just sitting here and I asked you, said, "Hey, can you grab me that cup of coffee?" No big deal. You're gonna pick up and do it. But then at the same point, if I just go, "Hey, can you grab me that cup of coffee?" Well, what are you going to do? You're going to get defensive. You're going to get offensive. You're going to start getting that argumentative, like, "Whoa, why are you coming at me like this? I didn't say anything different, but it's how I said it."
right.
And that's, I think, a lot of the reasons why we can't get past these myths because we can't sit here and rationally discuss how it helps, what the drawbacks might be as well. We get into a big argument about it and nothing gets solved. At least that's
Mm,
my take on all that.
right.
So now, how about this PTSD and cannabis? How do you think PTSD and cannabis could go hand in hand together?
Well, you got to remember, we've talked about this in a number of shows dealing
Mm-hmm.
with veterans and
Correct.
post
And we're about
traumatic.
to again.
Yeah, yeah. The PTSD is in not only veterans, but just modern day citizens who
Yes.
go through traumas in life, whether it's the losing of a family member, friend, seeing something violent or offensive happening in front of them, something shocking, something harmful or hurtful happen to them, whether it's a car accident or an injury itself. People have traumas
Yes.
more than just veterans themselves. So the treatment for that comes from cannabis
Mhm.
by the calmness, which is the side effect of cannabis.
Yep.
Um, don't get me wrong, the intoxication can also cause some form of anxiety,
Yeah.
but that's why it's important to maintain a wellness and a balance through the dosing and understanding the dosing. It's almost like following the same prescribement or prescription on the bottle when you're prescribed by a doctor.
Right.
There's an understanding that comes along with that, so that way people can feel good and feel balanced.
No, absolutely. Speaking of what you said about everyday people, so to speak, dear friend of mine literally was asleep as their house was burning around them, but the dog woke them up and got them out. They still have PTSD to this day from that, and they use cannabis regularly. So it
Yeah,
does. It helps most of us. Now, for veterans diagnosed with PTSD, or as we know, post traumatic stress disorder, looking for alternative ways to treat it, the first FDA regulated study on the benefits of smoking yielded favorable results in 2020. They did study for vets who used it and those who did not. One of the biggest takes away from the study is that the veterans with PTSD can use cannabis at self-managed dosage and at least for short term and are not experiencing a plethora of side effects or worsening symptoms. The main component, as we've said, the THC, is an intoxicating and psychoactive ingredient that produces a euphoric high effect, as they say. And unlike CBD, one of the non-intoxicating cannabinoids in the cannabis plant, the use of THC has not been, as we know, widely adopted in the US for medical, therapeutic, or recreational uses. As of May 18th, cannabis has been legalized for widespread medical use in 36 states, 4 US territories, according to the National Conference of State Legislators. Cannabis is still, as we know, prohibited for prescription use by the Department of Defense and the VA. Meanwhile, the VA estimates that 11 to 20% of recent veterans in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, as many as 1/3 of all veterans, suffer from PTSD. An approved an amendment to its 118th National Convention in 2017, the VFW continues to stand for and supports federally funded research of medical cannabis for veterans being treated by the VA for service-related chronic pain. So at least the VFW is in their corner and are trying to support it federally for funded research for medical. Now that is big.
That is, and you think about what the relative cost for cannabis compared to an opiate,
Right.
and then why would you want to use an opiate regularly for pain management?
Right.
Opiates kill people daily. So, I mean, I'm glad to hear that the VFW is advocating for it, and the VFW is part of the federal government. I mean,
Right.
I think it is a private nonprofit. It's not a government entity or agency, but is a private nonprofit that's pushing and advocating for veterans. And our veterans need so much support
Absolutely.
in their day-to-day as they go back from a combat life back to being a civilian. And I think that change is drastic when you look in all due consideration to what it takes to be a soldier, to be prepared on a moment's notice to defend this great country that we live in, the expectations and the demands that are in place for you to be able to protect and serve,
Right.
and then you no longer do that. Does that just easily shut off?
Mm-hmm.
When you go through the changes that you go through, whether you have seen atrocities or disasters that have happened, you know, there are some people that have great compassion and have a conscience. It's themselves. But
Right.
then what you also got to keep in mind is that it's a lot that goes along with that.
Absolutely. And one of our other problems is all these people that are the veterans that try to get help at a VA, they have to sometimes wait weeks and months to get treatment of any kind. And if we could get the cannabis more accessible to them and make it where it's allotted, they could have pain relief cheaper and faster than having to wait.
Absolutely. And I think it's easier when it's in a smokable form.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think it's called incarboxylation.
I believe so.
That it immediately fuses with your endocrine
Right.
system, um, and it's closest to your brain, and the brain is able to get those effects um, that are therapeutic.
Right. So we need to make big strides there, and we hope that that's coming. But then you go on the flip side in there. Of course, we talked about this too. But what about and being that this is Gun Awareness Month, what about owning a firearm and cannabis legal? We've seen a lot of that. Now, the penalties for violating federal law by possessing firearms while using cannabis can be severe. Anyone who is found to be in possession of a firearm while using marijuana can be charged with a federal crime, which carries a penalty of up to 10 years in prison. And in addition, anyone knowingly sells a firearm to someone who uses it is also breaking the law and could face a prison sentence of up to 10 years.
Mm.
That's the first part. And we got to think that includes people who have a medical card. Now, in
Right.
some cases, gun owners who use marijuana may not even realize they're breaking the law. For example, someone who uses it legally under state law may not be aware that they are prohibited from possessing firearms under the federal law. This can lead to unintentional violations and serious consequences. The confusion surrounding it can also impact gun dealers. The ATF has issued a guidance stating that gun dealers should not sell firearms to anyone who has any reason to believe is a user, even if the individual has a valid state issued medical marijuana card. So, aren't we kind of infringing on two rights there? The right for them to get treatment help, especially when it's legal, and the right to bear an arm?
Absolutely. And that paradox is gonna just come up because they're both um on two different spectrums when it comes to that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that the tough thing about um firearms and drugs have never went together.
Right,
So the charges literally double, if not triple, on you when you're in possession of both. Um, there has to be some clear guideline. It's no different than possessing the firearm and you're intoxicated
right.
from alcohol.
Or a
So
prescribed drug.
absolutely. So it shouldn't make it that much more
No.
level of difficulty for people to possess both because I mean if you look at alcohol, it's still a mind altering substance if you want to look at it. You can be subjected to intoxication, which means discretion can totally change under the influence of alcohol.
Yes.
So same thing with a prescribed drug itself. Why is the severity different with cannabis than it would be any narcotic or opiate or alcohol?
Right. And this means that the gun dealer could be held liable if they sell the firearm to someone who's a known user. But let's take it to the next step. Let's say that you're living with your family. You have a firearm. A member of your family has a medical card. Maybe you don't use it, but your family member does. Now, wouldn't that also be a violation of having that firearm, even though it's registered under you in that home?
Oh yeah.
So how do you protect that step? If you're selling to someone who you don't know is a known user, do you have to do a background check now on the whole family to see if anybody else is registered? I mean, that
You
opens
know
up a lot.
that's just taking it way too far and making it very very complicated. And it just seems like it's a catch up
Right.
um, to a lot of people. And it just I think um, in this podcast as we talk about those type of concerns, we need more people to be aware of these catch clauses or these catch ups that can infringe on your freedoms.
Right.
Um, it definitely will totally affect your freedoms. It will take away from your livelihood because now you have a legality that you have to attend to, and your
Right.
freedom depends on it. And then any entitlement that you're supposed to get in this country can also be infringed upon if you have a particular set of arrest on your record. It could cause you denial on housing. It could cause you denial on lending or funding. And these are detriments that can affect your life. It could change and add a tremendous amount of stress to the individuals where you have more panic and more anxiety.
Mhm.
And it's just because you didn't know. And we have to try to do everything that we can to try to inform people of these things so they can openly be aware of what's going on. And by being aware of what's going on, you can make a decision. And some people do make a decision against the grain, um, but at the same time, how these laws are set up right now, there is a beneficial system when it comes to law enforcement
Right.
from people going to court, paying fines on these circumstances, and I just think that the allocation of the monies are improper and could be done totally different and totally equitable, so that way it can actually help and benefit people.
And now it's interesting what you just made a comment on that because I'm going to get to something like that in a minute. But gun dealers are required to perform a background check on potential buyers before selling it. As part of it, they must ask them if they use illegal drugs, including marijuana. If the buyer admits to using, the dealer is prohibited from selling them the firearm. If the buyer lies about the drug and is later found as a user, the gun dealer can still be held liable. Number one, in the case number CR-22-00328-PRW, the United States prosecutor made the following argument. Marijuana is illegal under federal law. Anyone that uses it is a lawbreaker. The lawbreakers aren't part of the people whose rights are protected by the Constitution. Therefore, users are not entitled to the Second Amendment right. So
Yeah.
how about that thought?
And that is, in some ways, depriving somebody of their constitutional rights to a certain degree. But then all of these rules and laws are wrote for a particular reason.
Right.
And I think that they were wrote with a certain closed-mindedness approach to this. Um, whether there was a myth out there at the time that they didn't understand, and they wrote the laws around that myth.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day, it's still being perpetuated against the rights and the livelihoods of select individuals because of choice.
Now, keep in mind, the brilliance of the Constitution is that the Constitution can be changed. It's a brilliance that the forefathers wrote this in the terms of we don't know everything, things could change. But unfortunately, when it comes to something like this, we're not having the open mindedness to allot that change.
Well, one thing I could say about amendments, you can amend. That's number one. Number two, it takes a very stand up individual to propose an amendment and put all of the diligence it takes
Right.
to write one. Um, and everyone doesn't have that same courage, that same internal fortitude to push them uh, to that level to demand and dictate a circumstance that will help so many people. It
Right.
just takes a very, very stand up, outstanding person that knows what they're doing and how to do it. There's a lot of people in this world that don't know what they're doing, and they're doing it out of being told wrong, taught wrong, or they just don't know better.
Right.
But if there was a way for them to get the correct information, it would be so liberating to them that it will invoke a tremendous change in a lot of people, and the legalities that people are subjected to will reduce. They'll fall to a lower level so that way that people can enjoy quality of life and not go through situations and setbacks.
Now, that particular case that I gave you a moment ago was Oklahoma, and they're not alone in challenging the consumer rights to own a firearm. Florida, Texas, and a few other states as well have joined in on that, but that's something that still is a fight and is still going to be battling for a while.
Yeah, that's something that we just want to continue to monitor, and let's keep talking about it so that way that it gets to the right people who can actually push this and create that change that need to be seen.
Yep. So now I want to go into ALS, which we talked about at the start of the show, and cannabis some. Now, let me give you some facts first. I want to give you these blind facts and then get your response as we get into it. So I got a few listed here. Every 90 minutes, someone is diagnosed or passes from ALS. 90% of these cases occur without any family history at all. Onset is between 40 and 70 years of age. The life expectancy is between 2 to 4 years. By 2040, ALS incidence is predicted to increase worldwide by 70%. There's no cure. ALS is always fatal. Rates in Michigan alone have doubled over the last 10 years. ALS can strike at any time, but it's most commonly between 55 and 75. And it's estimated, and I'll pause after this one, it's estimated that between 14,000 and 15,000 Americans currently have ALS.
Yeah, it's and the tough thing about different afflictions, it starts with the diagnosis and being able to have correct treatment. And I go back and I look at affordable health care when it comes to those concerns. And if people had it, it would be so easy to
Right.
help people and get them treated, so they don't go through these tremendous life-changing circumstances.
Right. So it affects slightly more men than women, but how about this one? Military veterans are 1.5 to 2 times more likely to develop ALS than people who have not served in the military.
Yeah.
90% of ALS cases are considered sporadic, meaning there is no clear reason for this disease at all. 5 to 10% of ALS cases are familiar and due to mutated genes. The first symptom is hand or leg and is referred to as the limb onset. For others, the first symptoms are speech or swallowing difficulties, called the bulbar onset. The spread of these symptoms differ from patient to patient, but eventually all patients will lose the ability to move and breathe on their own. So that means basically there's no one particular thing that says this is what I could be. You could have 5 or 6 different symptoms that another person didn't have, but you could still have ALS.
Yep.
They talk about it doesn't affect the mental ability. ALS patients burn calories faster than non-sufferers and are often they are often underweight. There isn't one test. How about that? There isn't one test that diagnoses ALS. Diagnosis is done through a variety of observation and scans. So that right there means if your expectancy is 2 to 4 years, by the time you do all of these tests and results, a year could be gone.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Think about that for a minute.
Yeah.
There's no known cause, but researchers think it's a combination of genetics and environmental triggers. Researchers are studying exposure to toxic substances such as diet and physical trauma as a potential. There's no cure, as we said. They'll undergo therapy to help make things more comfortable, but they can't be cured for it. Now, the drug Robucan can offer patients a few extra months, as the drug has been shown to slightly reduce motor neuron damage. Now, I've given you a lot of these facts and whatnot. A lot of this sounds pretty down, correct?
Mm-hmm.
In a minute, we're going to get to some positive those when we get to the cannabis on. Now, you remember the ice bucket challenge, right?
Yes.
Remember that? Okay. That kind of brought some awareness to it. It raised a huge amount of awareness to, and I may say this wrong, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, which is ALS, popularly known as Lou Gehrig's disease. Hence the reason I brought up Lou Gehrig and the Yankees earlier. With the help of celebrity politicians and thousands of participants, ALS raised $94.3 million for research. However, awareness may remain unaware of significant benefits that medical marijuana has in the treatment. The endocannabinoid system, like we talked about, right? It helps eat, sleep, relax, forget, and protect. Okay, so we know it's fatal, right? The hallmarks of ALS is rapid progression of weakness, paralysis. Death occurs in 3 to 5 most cases. The brain function remains intact. So if the brain function remains intact, and we've seen what cannabis does, wouldn't that help and possibly bring back, as we said, with Alzheimer's, those dead cells?
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely. And the research needs to show even more how and why the timeline, and it should have more statistics regarding the test subjects, especially for the background and maybe certain variables um, in that research. As far as give an example of variable, does this person have a uh, healthy lifestyle as far as exercise? Do they exercise 2 or 3 times a week, or do they exercise none?
right.
Um, these are variables that will help with the overall look of health and vitality to see the total impact, um, what it has on those test subjects.
And so many other things too. Alcohol use. What is their dietary type structure? All of those would play into it. We just saw earlier where they talked about different toxic traits, including your lifestyle and your diet. So the
Right.
exact cause of the pathogens or ALS is poorly understood, and why pharmaceutical industry has made treatment options available. None, zero of these treatments prevent the disease progression or death.
Right.
So they're making money off of just trying to, I wouldn't even say progress the life, because if the average lifespan is 2 to 4 years, there's not going to be much of a progression there. All they're trying to do is just to soothe you and try to keep things better for you. But
Right.
the human clinical studies on THC only cannabis are limited, as we know, by small sample size. Research regulations for the clinical use of THC has made it difficult. Scheduled 1 to recruit ALS patients in a timely manner because it's 2 to 4, right?
Right.
Despite the obstacles, 2 human studies have been conducted. One of the studies was a pilot study investigating the safety and tolerability of the THC in ALS patients. And this was all the way back in 2002, 20 years ago. The clinical study confirmed symptomatic benefits for appetite, insomnia, and the spasticity of the muscle spasms. The second research study was conducted as an anonymous survey in 80 countries. 130 surveys were completed, and the age roughly was around 54. Participants reported that cannabis helped provide relief from drooling, speech, swallowing difficulties, appetite loss, weakness, shortness of breath, the spasticity, depression, and pain. This is done across the globe. Why are we still struggling with it here?
That tells you that somebody's benefiting from this restriction that's out there.
Right.
Um, I don't want to point fingers at some of the politicians, but their salaries are derived off of incarcerations of people under these circumstances. I hate to say that.
Well, and let's be honest here too, and we're not going to go through the stats. A, I don't have it in front of me. B, we're not going on the stats of it. But why do so many politicians go in and remember they make a certain amount a year? You can look that up, how much they make a year. Look at their net wealth before they enter office and their net worth after. That doesn't add up, does it?
Oh no, it just tells you the benefit. They know what the monies are coming in from these prosecutions, especially with the judges,
Yeah.
and the exorbitant amount of money that these cities are making, and they can work on the homeostasis of their relative cities, um, by allocating funds for mental health, by allocating funds for the homeless population, by allocating funds for education. And if you got to think about it right now with all of these private prisons popping up,
Yes.
And you got people benefiting from these private prisons, but then they're cutting back on educational funding, which means that you're creating more juveniles. You're creating more indiscretions in these adolescents because they're not being educated, they're not being taught, they're not being inspired, and then you're allowing whether they're rearing or their discretion that they get from their parenting to prevail.
Mm-hmm.
But if you just look at it, they're just allowing a portion of the population to be incarcerated, and then they're not rehabilitating these people
No.
in prison. Um, what about the preventative measures
Right.
before they go into prison by ensuring job and opportunity and ensuring that there's a particular way of life that you cannot allow to occur.
Right.
All of these crimes are spiking, and it's just because you've reduced education and you've reduced accountability. These kids can do and say whatever to their parents. They can do and
Right.
say whatever to the educators. I mean, when you hear about kids as young as 7, 8 years old carrying a firearm to school,
Right.
how unthinkable that is. Something's wrong in society, and there are some deep-rooted changes that need to occur. So it still goes back to the powers that be when they make these rules. They're making it to allow these margins to be collected from the public trust. The public has to pay for these prisons, and the money for these prisons are going into individuals and corporations that own these prisons.
Right.
And they benefit from people going the wrong way, doing the wrong thing.
No, right. And then, to expound on that, for example, you want to talk about the prisons, and let's just break it down for just a second there to an extent. We're all familiar with death row, right? Well, what do you think the average life expectancy on someone on death row is?
They put people on death row as high as 30, 40 years
Right.
before they kill them. And you know how much money
Mm-hmm.
it takes to house a
Correct.
person under those circumstances?
Correct. And that was kind of my point. So you're allowing yourself to make more money by continuing the time that they're allowed to stay on death row.
Yeah. And that just lets you know that process is it's a paved process. They've literally planned it out for it to be that way, and the powers that be benefit. I mean, everybody from the warden of that prison down to the individual correction officers
Oh,
to the facility providers. And you gotta ask yourself, yeah, the people who provide, they need their jobs, they need to deal with that, but I just don't see how and why 2, 3 decades for someone that you
okay.
sentenced to death for whatever God knows what atrocity they've done. And keep in mind, I don't want to say that everybody on death row is guilty because
Correct.
everybody on death row is not guilty
Correct.
because there's not irrefutable proof, but you have someone who have influenced a circumstance and have overlooked evidence because they were biased.
Mm-hmm.
So this happens in society still to this day. In 2023, it's definitely not fair to the people who have been unlawfully prosecuted, held against their will, and they were innocent, still are innocent, but they are serving time and may possibly be on death row. So it's a lot of things that go along with that,
Correct.
and that's a trauma within itself.
Now, what do you think on average, and I don't have this in front of me either, the average household income in America is roughly?
I would say that, well, that's a multi-tiered question because you have different classes, but overall, I would say the average is about 48,000 a year.
Okay, according to this, and this is in 2020, medium household income is 71,000, according to this. All right, that's just what it's showing. Now, I pulled this stat up while you were talking. This literally kind of turned my stomach, to be honest. According to Integral Justice, the average federal prisoner costs $37,500 per year, compared to a death row which costs $60,000 to $70,000 per year. So there's your answer right there. Double the resources. And if you're talking 30 years for someone who is on a death sentence to begin with, how much money are we just putting in there?
Let's just use the number of 100.
Right.
That's pretty significant. That's $7 million that's pumped in there out of city money.
30. If one prisoner stays on death row for 30 years, that's $2.1 million on just one.
My gosh.
Right? Now you see why I sat there for a minute, just kind of shook my head because when I saw that number, it blew my mind for a second. Wow. But
yeah,
we're going to go back here for a moment, close out on this little bit on ALS and cannabis because there is some good news. So furthermore, THC potentially reduces the oxidative and the excitotoxic damage in spinal cord cultures. The productive effects of cannabinoids in their antispastic effects MLS are well known. Furthermore, the cannabinoid receptors are upregulated in human tissue during the disease progression, making this an abundant target for treatment. So they're more accessible. It helps. The benefits of cannabis to treat ALS is the preventive, as we just spoke, but the basic laboratory and animal research suggests that THC may be the first and only naturally occurring non-toxic antioxidant to slow the progressions of the disease significantly. In addition to delaying the process of disease and increasing, how about this, and increasing the lifespan. Cannabinoid treatments may offer the benefits, like we said, sleep induction, appetite stimulation, saliva reduction, bronchialization, and muscle relaxation. So don't you think that would be great news for ALS? They're literally saying, not dramatically, but it can increase the lifespan.
You know, if you put this information in front of a legislator, a senator, a congressman, what are their publicly spoken virtues are on this matter? And I'm willing to bet that their answers will be right on the line of a yes and no.
Mm-hmm.
There's no definitive answer. Yeah, I totally agree with it. No, because you don't see it and you don't hear it.
Yes, but. Yes, however. Because they will, I'm sure, will sit there and look at it and go, these studies are great. Yes, I love it. But it's Scheduled 1. But it's illegal. But it's not FDA approved. There'll always be that and or but.
And that's what has to change. That's why somehow we have to order and request more research. And we got to continue to push to provide statistics that will be suitable enough for them to change their decision and their stance on it. But until the commander-in-chief himself is an advocate for it, totally understands and will set the laws and the legislation that will be similar to how we started this show off today, talking about Illinois with the tax relief and the tax credit. You have to create structure. You have to show some form of support. You have to show not only the research, but the opportunity. You have to give people an opportunity to live, survive, and thrive, and there's a way to actually do it, and you help people at the same time. But somebody's benefiting from these incarcerations. We just got finished going through this for the last half hour, talking about somebody's benefiting, and they're creating this, and the system's in place for that particular reason because of that benefit.
Well, and not just with the prison, but people are benefit from the backing of big pharma and from these opioids and everything else, which we have the stats that show it's a problem.
Absolutely.
We have it. We've had it for decades.
Yeah.
Preclinical and post-clinical data indicate that cannabis has a powerful effect in the G93A-SOD1 ASL mouse. So all of this is actually listed in clinical data,
Yeah.
but it's being pushed aside.
It is. Definitely is.
So I know we hit on a couple of different topics and try to hit some, important stuff of what this month is, and we'll do some more research and talk about this through. And we tried to hit it all from the PTSD to tying in guns with cannabis, Alzheimer's and cannabis, and of course ALS and cannabis. But in closing, just to kind of recap some of that, what are your overall thoughts with some of these stats and numbers that I'm sure you had not heard of because I hadn't?
We just definitely need more research for Alzheimer's and ALS patients, of course, for PTSD as well.
Yes.
As mental health is prevalent, cognitive health is also something, especially that the degenerative effect of the loss of cognitive ability and memory. We have to provide these therapeutic remedies that are available right now, but because they have been deemed on a Schedule 1 list, it can't get out there. It cannot be prescribed. You have doctors that will not prescribe or support it, and it's just because it's the law.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, if you want to be a law-abiding citizen, you follow the law.
Right.
So we need our legislators, our in government to make a change. They have to do the applicable research on their own. They have to educate themselves as well and provide a benefit to the people.
No, absolutely. And for those who follow our Twitter and our Matcha page on Facebook, I will continue, but I have been posting articles when I find them of who the potential presidential candidates that are running and what their stances are, good, bad, or indifferent, on cannabis, so that we try to give you some of that information to find out where these people stand, at least on this issue, so that we can help educate so that you can make your informed decision on who to vote for.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So a lot of information we kind of covered here on the first Wednesday of June. Got more to come this month. So get ready to close. So, of course, give your final thoughts, where they can reach out to you, connect with you, and we'll go from this Wednesday.
Thank you, everybody. Follow me, Big Boy Sam with 2 M's, and Sammy Mumphrey on LinkedIn. We thank everybody for tuning in today. We hope everyone has a great week, great weekend. Get all the wellness that you can. Definitely work on your balance and work on all the knowledge that you can to apply to a better you. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you guys for all being here. Just share this with people, these stats, these importancy, especially those who, have connections in the legal and medical field. We've got to get this stuff moving forward because we can help people with this. That's literally why it's called Matcha, Medical Association for Cannabis and Hemp of America, because that's what we're trying to see. The importance of it, what it can do for you medically, because we've seen it. The research is there. We just got to get more research and get it pushed. So thank y'all for joining us, for being here. See you again next Wednesday. You can reach out to me on both Twitter and Instagram on DJNQ75. And guys, follow us on all of our other social medias, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. Look forward to seeing you next week. Be blessed. Be safe. We'll see you next Wednesday.